house that didn't return anything. The Sodder children disappearance. There are cases that do not behave like ordinary tragedies. They do not resolve cleanly in records. They do not close neatly in reports. And they do not fade the way most events usually do. Instead, they accumulate detail. Not always useful detail, not always consistent detail, but detail that keeps the case alive long after the moment itself has passed. Tonight's case is one of those. It begins in a small town in West Virginia, Fayetteville. December 24th, 1945, a night that on paper should have been uneventful. A family preparing for Christmas. A quiet home, cold winter air, routine holiday stillness. And then, a fire. But what makes this case endure is not the fire itself. It is what came after. Because when investigators arrived, they expected to find a clear and contained explanation. Instead, all they found were contradictions, missing confirmations, and a series of physical details that never quite aligned with the expected outcome. And in the absence of clarity, something else formed. Questions. Lots of questions. This is the disappearance of the Sodder children. And even now, decades later, it remains one of the most debated, unsolved cases in American history. Before we enter the night of the fire itself, we need to understand the structure of the life that was interrupted. Because nothing in this case begins at midnight. It begins long before that. The Sodder family lived in Fayetteville, West Virginia, a coal region town shaped by labor, migration, and tightly woven communities on Bee Ridge Road. George Sodder and Jenny Sodder were Italian immigrants who built their household through years of work, adaptation, and persistence. They raised 10 children in total. On the night of December 24th, 1945, 9 of the children were at home. The house itself was a wooden 2-story structure with a garage and adjacent yard space. Like many rural homes of the period, it relied on a mix of heating methods common in mid-20th century Appalachia. Coal heating, wood stoves, electrical wiring that by modern standards would later be considered limited or outdated. Neighbors described the Sodder household as active, children constantly moving between inside and out. A busy home, not chaotic in a dangerous sense, but full of life and movement. There were no widely documented signs of instability, no police records suggesting threats, no confirmed disputes that escalated into the violence. However, in later accounts collected by the family, several details emerged that would become part of the broader interpretive landscape. A traveling salesman who allegedly made unusual comments, brief interactions with strangers in the months prior, and George Sodder's outspoken political views during wartime, which some later suggested may have created tension in certain social circles. None of these were ever confirmed as connected to criminal intent, but they would resurface repeatedly in later theories. At the time, none of it indicated what was about to happen. We can reconstruct the night using the family testimony and later investigative review. It is not perfect, but it's the closest approximation that we have. The house follows normal holiday routine on the evening hours of December 24th. The children are present, activities are ordinary, and the environment is calm. George and Jeannie remain awake later than most of the children. This was not unusual during holidays. The house gradually settles into nighttime quiet. Lights dim, movement slows, sleep begins across the household. Shortly after midnight, Jenny Sodder later reports that the telephone rang. When she answered, she heard silence. Then what she described as brief laughter. Then the line disconnected. No caller was identified. No origin was traced. At the time, it was treated as a nuisance call. Later, it would become one of the most repeated and debated details in the case. Not because it proved anything, but because it felt out of place. Around 1 a.m., George Sodder reported waking due to an unusual sound outside of the home. The description varies across retellings. A rolling noise, something striking the house, or impacts near the roof. There was no confirmed external source, no identified machinery, no documented weather event, no confirmed passerby activity. Shortly afterward, smoke was detected. The fire spread rapidly. The speed of spread becomes one of the earliest points of disagreement in later reviews. George attempted to reach the upper floor where several of the children were sleeping. He reported that the staircase became impassable very quickly. Jenny attempted to reach the other children from accessible areas, but the conditions deteriorate rapidly. Within minutes, evacuation becomes necessary, and the family exits the home. At this point, several critical systems fail or become inaccessible. The phone line does not function. The family's vehicle will not start. A ladder that is normally in place for roof access is not in place. Each of these points is documented through later testimony and neighbor statements. None were fully explained in the original fire report. And from here, the case transitions from event to investigation. Neighbors report seeing flames from multiple blocks away. Some describe the fire as unusually intense for a residential structure. Others focus on the speed of collapse. Emergency response in 1945 was limited compared to modern standards. Fire suppression efforts were constrained by equipment, access, and timing. Buckets, hose lines, improvised assistance. By the time the fire was fully under control, the structure had largely collapsed into debris. Wood framing, metal fragments, ash layers, and a reduced, unstable structure that made full access difficult. The fire officials began standard post-fire assessment. They examined possible origin points, the electrical systems, furnace and heating infrastructure, structural collapse patterns. The initial conclusion leans towards accidental fire origin, possibly electrical, possibly heating related. However, uncertainty begins to emerge during deeper inspection. One of the most sensitive aspects of the case involves expected physical remains. In structural fires of this scale, investigators typically expect identifiable remnants. However, in this case, reports describe limited recoverable material, fragmented bone-like substances of uncertain classification, no clearly documented identification of all missing individuals. Later analysis questioned whether recovered fragments were definitely human. No universally accepted forensic confirmation established identity of remains corresponding to the 5 missing children. The official conclusion remained unchanged, presumed death in fire, but the family disagreed and began compiling their own records. The Sodder family did not accept the official conclusion, not immediately, and not over Tom. They began documenting everything they could gather. They collected witness statements, they preserved photographs, they tracked reported sightings. They hired a private investigator to re-examine the scene and the reports. There were key areas of dispute that was raised by the family. They questioned the speed and the behavior of the fire, the lack of clear remains, the malfunctioning vehicle, the missing ladder, and the telephone failure. Each of these points, individually, could potentially have explanations. Together, they formed a pattern the family found difficult to accept as coincidence. The private investigator reviewed all available material and included fire scene documentation, structural layout, witness statements, timeline reconstruction, and no alternative confirmed conclusion was issued, but no element conclusively eliminated the family's concerns either. The case remained officially closed, but personally, it was unresolved. Over time, additional accounts surfaced. These were not uniform, and they were not independently verified in a way that allowed legal confirmation. But they were recorded. Before the fire, some witnesses reported unfamiliar individuals near the property, unfamiliar vehicles seen in the vicinity, and a man observed watching the house. None were identified. None were tied to suspects. After the fire, the family collected reports suggesting possible sightings of the children. These included a diner sighting in another state, a report of children seen with unfamiliar adults, passing vehicle observations years later. None were confirmed through documentation. None were verified through identity confirmation. But they were persistent enough to remain a part of the case file. Over time, interpretations diverged. There were several theories. The first theory was that it was a fatal fire with incomplete remains being recovered. This is the official position of the Fayette County Fire Department. It aligns with known fire behavior and certain structural conditions, but it does not resolve all of the inconsistencies raised by the family. Theory 2. The children were abducted. The children may have been removed before or during the fire, based on witness accounts and timing discrepancies, but there is no physical evidence that confirms this theory. The third theory was coordinated removal, a broader interpretation involving multiple individuals, based entirely on unverified accounts, and it's not supported by any forensic evidence. And then there is the folklore reinterpretation. Over the decades, the case has entered cultural retellings. Some versions incorporate unusual or unexplained elements. These are not supported by any investigative findings, and they exist as narrative reinterpretation and not evidence. The Sodder children case remains unresolved in a very specific way. Not because there is a lack of information, but because the available information does not converge cleanly into a single explanation. The official record states one outcome. The family believes another. Witness accounts introduce additional uncertainty. Time has preserved all versions without resolving conflict between them. In most investigations, Tom reduces ambiguity. Here, it expanded. And what remains is not closure, but structure without a final resolution. A fire that ended a house, but did not fully explain what was inside of it. Some stories don't ask to be remembered. They wait. If you're still here, it's already too late. This has been Diamonds After Dark. See you next time.